Oh, he finally relented. Yes. So tonight we are finally joined by Mr. Lee Carter, who is a delegate from the state of Virginia in District 50. He's a definitely, people think of, Alexandria as a Democratic Socialist, but when I think of DSA, I think of Lee. For me, he kind of brought that. He kind of stands out to me that way. So anyway, I digress, but thank you so much for finally coming, Lee.
And thank you so much for having me on. I do appreciate it.
Absolutely. So Lee is he is also savage. He posts some incredible things, and I can do it because I'm just an activist and me. But dude is like in government. And one of the best things I saw you post was when you told a dude on Twitter to eat your whole ass.
I think it was entire ass.
Entire ass.
Yeah.
That was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've really tried hard to combat is this notion that that politicians can't be people, right? Because we think of politicians in this country in particular as this sort of upper crust, folks that come from a certain background, folks that have lived a squeaky clean public life, and they have this manicured perception that they've managed throughout their entire lives, and really, we're coming to a point where we're moving into a post-privacy world. And so there are going to be people who are running for office who, my age and younger, we've grown up with the internet. We've grown up with all of our embarrassing moments on social media. And spoiler alert, the internet is forever. So you can't hide who you are. You can't even hide who you were. And I know people, change and grow over time. I certainly have. But we're going to have to get used to the idea of people in representative government that are just people. And once we start to accept that idea, not only will we get more human interactions with the folks that are supposed to represent us in government, we'll also get folks who are more representative of us in government. Because I'm just some trailer park kid from North Carolina. I'm one of two members of the House of Delegates that has no college degree. I never in a million years thought that I would be in elected office. My involvement in politics was sort of arguing with people on the internet, which clearly I still do, much to my campaign manager's chagrin. But it was a workplace injury that got me involved in politics. That's what put me over the edge from just arguing with people to actually running for office. And it was because, I got hurt at work, and the workers' compensation system was not there to protect me like everyone says it is. And I started going around to folks that I knew that were in politics, and I said, what are you going to do about workers' comp? And nobody had an answer. I had one person that actually worked for the state Democratic Party who said, we don't have any polling data on that. And I said, I don't care if you have polling data or not. It's broken, and people are losing their livelihoods just because they fall off a ladder or get shocked like I did or burned or something. And it needs to be fixed. And so, that's really at the core of what I've been fighting, sort of perception-wise, is this idea that politicians have to kowtow to civility, and we have to, maintain the peace and tranquility within government. But there is no tranquility between government and people that are being oppressed. So, rage is okay as long as you channel it into something productive. Being a human is okay. Having emotions is okay. having a messy life like hundreds of millions of Americans live is okay, as long as you're fighting for the things that will make life better for people.
Absolutely. That, right on. I don't even know what to say. Just right on. Um, you have been extremely candid about your personal life, being a single dad and being married multiple times, and working Uber on the side. You have been so open about all facets of your life, and you're like, fuck it, they're gonna dig it up anyway. Here's the truth. And post after post is just so real, and it's incredible. Even for someone like me who's not running for office, I'm not comfortable enough to share certain things, but you do. And so tell us what that's, is that kind of like a decision you make, that you're like, okay, today I'm going to be confident enough to share this, or do you just kind of do it on a whim?
Yeah, my Twitter in particular is sort of a stream of consciousness. It's not an official government account. It's not. I don't have staff running it. It's all me. I've lived a messy life. Who hasn't? I grew up in a small town in the South, and there's this cultural expectation that you marry young, you have kids, and you join the military in no particular order, and that's just what you do. And I was raised in that, and it took a long time and a lot of lived experience to realize that wasn't the life for me. But unfortunately, it took learning that lesson the hard way. It did take multiple times to realize that wasn't going to be, I didn't have that idyllic life in store. Especially, candidly, having been on the receiving end of two different abusive relationships, it really upends your life. And again, like I said a couple of minutes ago, I've been working hard to normalize the notion of people with messy lives being in roles of political leadership. It's okay if you haven't been perfect your entire life, as long as you recognize the ways in which your past doesn't live up to doesn't live up to the way that you want to live now, and recognize it, acknowledge it, and speak to the fact that you're better today than you were before, and you're gonna be better tomorrow than you are today.
Absolutely. I know I only vote for people who have lived. I don't want someone who's been with the same person their whole life and always had that cushy bank account, and like, no, I want someone who's had their heart broken, and I want someone who's lost a job. And these are things that are, that like we all experience. People shouldn't be elected by people who cannot identify with them. So I think that's one of the reasons I was drawn to you, because you're just so unabashedly honest, which isn't that common, especially in your work. So you kind of loosely touched on being in the military. What exactly did you do, and where did you go?
So I fixed electronics for 5 years. My job title was telephone systems and personal computer intermediate repairer. It's sort of the longest job title in the Marine Corps. I grew up in a military family. A member of my family has been in all 5 branches, including the Coast Guard, which is something that not a lot of people can say. And I was raised with this idea that that's a good way to get a jump start on your life. I have a conflicted relationship with my military service, because I'm very, very proud of where I was, and the things that I was thinking when I joined, which is I have an opportunity to get started on a career, and do something good in the process. But unfortunately, the reality is that the willingness to serve of people who enlist in the military is being essentially stolen from us by a foreign policy that doesn't live up to the rhetoric and the propaganda that we're constantly fed about what we're doing overseas. And fortunately, I never went into any combat zones. I was in a unit called the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, where we went out and we went out with the Navy and sat on ship, and we were sort of a quick reaction force in case we were needed. My first deployment, we weren't needed at all. So, I spent 7 months on the USS Bataan. I went to Spain, Greece, Bahrain, Kuwait, UAE, Jordan, and Turkey. I got drunk in a bunch of those countries. I did training exercises in some of them, but there was never any actual mission there. My second deployment, I went to Haiti after the earthquake in 2010, and so I was there and handing out construction supplies and MREs, and it was in the first 60 days after the earthquake struck. And this is, for folks who don't remember offhand the earthquake, the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, this is an earthquake that killed 200,000 people. And so, it was a tremendously devastated place. I spent most of my time there in a town called Petit Goâve, which was in sort of a richer area in Haiti, but it's richer by Haitian standards. And so, the buildings were better constructed. The people weren't as impacted. The casualties weren't as high, but they were still extraordinarily high. And, we still saw camps as far as the eye can see of people living in makeshift tents made out of their own clothes, with handwritten signs that said, USA, please help. And it eats at me every day thinking about the people that I couldn't help. I did what I was allowed to do. But unfortunately, because of decisions that were made at a higher level, particularly in the civilian leadership, I wasn't allowed to do everything that could have been done to help people. We look at particularly the cholera outbreak that occurred in the wake of the earthquake. Cholera is a disease that we've known for over a century how to pinpoint the source of an outbreak. It's very simple. You bust out a map and you put a pin in every case. And eventually you realize that they're all clustered around a water source, and you quarantine that water source. And that's it. Outbreak's done. But, the US government made the decision not to do that, because the source of the outbreak, it was later revealed, was a camp that was set up by the Army of Nepal. And the US government decided that it was better to not embarrass the Nepalese government by telling everyone that this outbreak was caused by an improperly constructed latrine. And of course, that information got out anyway. It just took a few years, and we could have stopped the outbreak in its tracks. But because of that political decision that was made by the civilian leadership, while I was there and other Marines were there and the Army was there and civilian aid workers were there, and we had water purification equipment, and we could have stopped it, 10,000 Haitians quite literally shit themselves to death because of that. And it's very, very emblematic of the willingness to serve and the motivations in people's hearts that get them into service being stolen from us by a foreign policy that just doesn't care about people.
Absolutely. I actually I was at Occupy DNC at the convention in 2016, and I met 8 Haitian women there who were born and raised in Haiti, and they had just recently moved to the States. And they were telling me about how bad it was. And they were actually there to protest Hillary. That's why they were there. So, that's got to be just bananas, you know, seeing her run for president and knowing that so many Haitians actually thought that she was going to help them and give them money she was raising that she never gave them.
Yeah, and I don't know, everything about what was done. I know about that specific instance where, the political decision to not embarrass the government of Nepal took precedence over the decision to save 10,000 lives. And frankly, you don't have to know everything about U.S. foreign policy to know that it serves profit and control first. You just have to know, a general overview. It's not just Haiti. It's the fact that, throughout the world, whenever even a nominally left-wing government gets elected somewhere, what do you know? That country needs freedom, and the U.S. is going to bring it. And we don't really care how many people have their lives destroyed, how many people are killed. It happened in Chile with the Salvador Allende government. He nationalized the tin mines, and that was unacceptable to the U.S. So we sponsored a coup and had him overthrown. It happened in Iran with Mohammad Mossadegh. He nationalized the oil industry and compensated the British investors. I mean, nobody lost money on it. They just couldn't make more money. But that was unacceptable to the U.S. and the UK. So again, we sponsored a coup to have him overthrown. In place after place after place. I mean, how many times have we invaded Nicaragua over the price of bananas? It's just knowing the history of U.S. involvement in foreign countries will let you know what the priorities of our government are. But unfortunately, our government is also the ones who set our history curricula in schools, right? History is inherently political because what you teach people about the past determines how they view the present and the future. And we're not teaching these things about U.S. foreign policy in our history classes that make it very, very clear that we are not always the good guys.
Absolutely. So, do your kids come home and get this, lack of a better term, whitewashed, history and say, Dad, did you know this? And you're like, what?
Well, my daughter's 7, so she hasn't gotten to that point yet. But you better believe when she starts getting into world history and U.S. history class, there's going to be another lesson after school.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, it's like that old Woody Guthrie song, what did you learn in school today, dear little child of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? Yeah. That's what it's going to be. And this is for anyone out there watching who has kids. I would encourage you to have these conversations with your kids about the history curriculum that you're learning in school. It's important to learn it so that you can pass the class and get a good grade. It's also important to have the full context. So that you don't just think, oh, there was a depression out of nowhere and the New Deal happened because the government felt like doing it and the depression was fixed and capitalism is great, right? You need to make sure that kids don't walk away from school with that notion.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 40 and these kids who are like 6 are learning stuff I was never taught. I feel so gypped. It's crazy. I'm like, I was never taught these things. Yeah, that's a really good point if you're a parent to keep up on that. So I digress a bit, but you, as I touched on earlier, you are known as a Democratic Socialist. You call yourself a socialist sometimes Correct. As well. I know DSA endorsed you. What's that?
Exclusively, actually. Yeah, I'm a dues-paying member of the Democratic Socialists of America, but I don't identify as a Democratic Socialist. I identify as a socialist because, the second most misused word in American politics is socialism. of course, the number one most misused word in politics is capitalism, right? So you have to know the definitions of both, right? So a lot of people have this idea. In fact, the overwhelming majority of people have this idea that capitalism is just markets and freedom and democracy, but it couldn't be farther from the truth. Markets existed long before capitalism. Capitalism's only 300 years old. Markets have existed for thousands of years, and frankly, they're probably going to exist for a while after capitalism is gone. So what really differentiates capitalism from the systems that came before, mercantilism and feudalism and slave economies and all that, what differentiates it is the relationship between the people who do the work and the people who own the workplace. And you've got a small minority of people who, by virtue of a piece of paper that says that they own it, make all the decisions about what's done in the workplace, including what to do with the money. You've got the overwhelming majority of people who are actually doing the work. People that are supportive of capitalism, they like to say, oh, it's the job creators that are taking all the risk. But in reality, what are they actually, what is Jeff Bezos risking? When he makes an investment, what he's risking is losing money and eventually having to go back to work like the rest of us. But those of us, the overwhelming majority of us, the working class, are risking our lives on a day-to-day basis. We're risking our health. We're risking that, that the person who actually makes the decisions in our workplace might not be competent and might run the business into the ground. And then through no fault of our own, we're out on the streets with no way to provide for our families. We're risking so much on a daily basis, but even though we're the ones that are primarily impacted by a decision in the workplace, we have no power over the decision making, right? So the working class are the ones who create all the value. We bring in every single dollar to every single enterprise, and the capitalist class, the owning class, are the ones who make all the decisions, even though they've never turned a wrench, they've never answered a phone call for an angry customer, they've never done any of the things that makes an enterprise productive, right? So socialism is defined in opposition to that. Socialism is seen by a lot of us as the shadow of capitalism. We're the escape route. We are what is gonna come next when capitalism, through its own inherent contradictions, collapses. And the way you define socialism, it's an umbrella term for any economic system in which the decision-making power in an enterprise rests in the hands of the people who are doing the work, right? So you eliminate that class distinction. No longer do you have workers on one hand and owners on the other. You have one class of worker owners. And there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. There have been various experiments in doing that in the real world in the past, from the cooperative movement, which is frankly, older than the United States itself, which still has a political party in the United Kingdom, the Cooperative Party, which falls under the Labour Party banner, but is actually a separate party, to what we've seen with attempts to implement what's called the dictatorship of the proletariat in places like Russia and China, right? And so, this is, I use the term socialist rather than democratic socialist because, in my opinion, if it's not democratic, it's not socialism, right? And there are internal democratic mechanisms within Marxism-Leninism, but I'm not a Marxist-Leninist because I don't believe that we should do in the United States what was done in Russia and China and Cuba. I think that the material conditions on the ground dictate a different path forward for us. Whereas, in those places where they had Marxist-Leninist revolutions, that was the path that was dictated to them because they were impoverished, frankly, agricultural economies with largely illiterate peasant farmers, all three of them. And so that's why that's the path that worked for them. I think, in a developed country in the first world, that's not the path that would work for us. And so, this is, you gotta love the left. There's so many labels. There's so many words that need defining. We have our own language over here that a lot of people are not exposed to. But that's part of my challenge, is educating people on what the words mean. That's the first and foremost challenge. I know that was a bit of a rant.
Yeah. To David, yes, he is running in Virginia. He is currently serving, and he's running for re-election. So one of the things someone sent me last month, you were on MSNBC with Soledad O'Brien, who is a damn mess, who is like a Bernie hater extraordinaire.
Hunt, I believe.
What's that?
It was Casey Hunt.
No, there were two of them. Oh yeah, it was Casey Hunt. They're the same person. Essentially, they look the same, and they talk the same, and they act the same.
She follows everybody on Twitter. I don't understand. She follows literally every account. You find some random person with 6 followers. One of them is going to be Soledad O'Brien. I don't get it.
I know. Well, she hasn't seen my tweets yet, because I'd be blocked, that's for sure. She's something. Oh my God. So I guess, well, I forget the blonde lady's name. There was a blonde lady on there with you too. And I don't think she got it at all. It was just, she was confused. So you were asked, she was asked, do you think a socialist can win? And you said, I think a socialist needs to win. And hell yeah. So obviously they were talking about Bernie, obviously. Now, it sounds like you endorsed him. Have you officially endorsed him?
Yeah, let me go ahead and do that right now.
I would have been like, technical issues, hold on.
Yeah, I mean, I just he was instrumental in sort of my political education and political development, and figuring out what it was that I believed should be the way forward for working people in our country, and frankly throughout the world, because what happens in U.S. politics is so determinative of what happens in the rest of the world. When I first decided to run for office, I considered myself kind of, I considered myself a Democrat. I still have a little bit of memorabilia from back then, which is a little, but disaffected, disillusioned by what they did whenever they got into power. And I didn't really have a system for explaining why they acted the way that they did when they actually had a chance to change something. I had always thought in the back of my head, why do companies always maximize profit at the expense of people? Why isn't there ever a point where they just say, we're making enough? But I didn't have an answer to that question. I considered myself kind of a New Deal type Democrat. I thought, it would be better if the Democratic Party could get back to where we were when FDR was president. And
do you think that's feasible?
Well, so there are lessons to be learned from the New Deal. This is where Bernie comes in, because, I had started running for office, talking about fixing workers' comp, talking about making sure that everybody can see a doctor when they need to. And Bernie comes along, and here's this guy who's supposed to get 3% in Iowa and drop out. And he ends up getting 45% nationally in the primaries. He wins, 23 states, something like that. And he's calling himself a socialist. And I literally Googled, what is socialism? And I started reading, and I read up on, the history of the labor movement and the bloody labor wars that we had, where, workers stood up and demanded better from the companies they worked for and were massacred for it at the Battle of Blair Mountain, at the Embarcadero in San Francisco, the Haymarket Affair in Chicago, on and on and on down the line. And I started, I started listening to some folks that were critiquing capitalism as a system and saying that, it's because you have this concentration of wealth and power in a small handful of people's pockets. And those people are the ones that dictate what happens in workplaces all across the world. And so that's why you've got this inherent upward extractive economy that takes value away from working people and puts it into the hands of people who have never worked a day in their lives and never will. And the more I read, the more I said, you know what, God, this makes sense. And eventually I just realized, oh, God damn it. I am one. I always have been one. Now I have the framework to understand the problems that I see in our economy and in our world. Now I have the framework that lets me, frankly, look at the present day situation and be somewhat predictive of what will happen. And for anyone with a background in the sciences, that's one of the biggest indicators that your theory is right, is when you're able to apply that theory and predict future events. And so, that was my journey to becoming a socialist. Now, you asked about, what would happen if the Democratic Party got back to where we were under FDR. Now, FDR was very, very explicitly not a socialist. FDR was what we would call today a social democrat. Somebody who uses the struggle for working people to come up with a compromise between capital and labor. And the New Deal was exactly that. He said in his private correspondence, he wrote letters back and forth to people all the time, business leaders, where he explicitly said, if we don't come up with Medicare, if we don't come up with a Social Security, unemployment insurance, a jobs program, if we don't come up with all of these things to look after the people that have been impacted by the Depression, there will be a bloody revolution. And he was from the upper class. He was talking to his fellow members of the capitalist class. And he was saying, our heads are going to be on pikes if we don't do this. And so that's where the New Deal came from. It was to sort of relieve the tension and stop people from continuing to organize within their workplaces and continuing to demand more and more control over their lives and the economy. And the lesson of the New Deal is, even if you do that, you're gonna improve lives for a lot of people in the here and now, but you've still got this exploitive system. You're still leaving the incentive structure in place for millionaires and billionaires and large corporations to continue consolidating their wealth and power, and you're leaving them the incentive and the ability to take back all the gains that you've won. Right. So that's why from day one, the Civilian Conservation Corps was under attack. That's why from day one, the Works Progress Administration was under attack. From day one, Social Security has been under attack, is because we left those people with the means and the motivation to attack the things that make our lives better. And so this is why, just recreating the New Deal, to me, is not enough. We need to reconfigure our economy entirely so that working people are the ones making the decisions, because that's the only way to guarantee that they won't be clawed back. Our gains won't be clawed back later.
Absolutely. And taking, similar to Bernie, you unionized your campaign, which is a huge step. So
I want to say, I didn't unionize my campaign. My staff unionized, and I recognized it.
Gotcha.
This feels gross, but technically I'm management now, which that doesn't sit right. But it is what it is. But yeah, my staff organized with UFCW, Local 400, And it was unanimous. Of course, the bargaining unit of 2, so it was either going to be unanimous or it wasn't going to pass because you need 50% plus 1, and one person is only 50%. But yeah, I was happy to voluntarily recognize their union. I believe that all workers deserve a union as long as they're working in a top-down hierarchical enterprise, and that doesn't change just because I'm the one at the top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of jobs as well, Bernie is the only person out of the 25 candidates who has a federal jobs guarantee on his platform. Is that something you support?
God, yes. Yeah. You know, one of the things that sets capitalism apart, you know, one of the things that really a lot of people notice about capitalism, whether they realize that it's inherent to the system or not, is that you have permanent unemployment. You know, there will, you know, under capitalism, there will never be a time when everybody is employed who wants to be. And there is work that needs to be done that's not being done. And capitalism can't match those two up. And the reason that it can't match those two up is because if you know you're always going to have a job, you're not going to put up with getting ripped off in the workplace, right? And so the federal jobs guarantee is more than just directly putting people to work. It's giving people that escape route where if they're being exploited in their workplace and they decide to stand up and they're punished for organizing, you know, if they're fired for forming a union or asking for a raise or what have you, there is this safety net there for them to fall back on. There's still employment. They can still, you know, be put to productive use, addressing the problems that we have in our society, fixing the things that need to be fixed, and provide for their families.
Absolutely. Plus, it's so relative to people who are getting out of prison. They don't have to check that box. They, you know, they don't have to go through all those things just to be able to get back on their feet. There's so many advantageous things about it. Also, as far as the Green New Deal, you know, environmentally, how can we feasibly get any of that stuff done in 11 years without having a federal job guarantee?
Yeah, that's it exactly. You know, our economy is really based upon this extractive fossil fuel industry that is literally destroying our ability to live on this planet. And, you know, half of all carbon emissions that have ever been emitted were in the last 30 years. And it's been more than 30 years since the fossil fuel companies learned that they were destroying our climate. You know, they knew back in the mid-1970s at the latest, you know, that's sort of, that's just where we have proof that they learned about it. They knew in the 1970s that fossil fuels were emitting greenhouse gases that were going to warm the planet to an uninhabitable level. And they doubled down and tripled down and quadrupled down because the structure of decision-making does not incentivize sustainability. It incentivizes short-term profit. It's what can you get in the next quarter. It's not can your grandchildren live.
Absolutely. Is there, let's put it this way, there's 25 candidates. Is there one which you think would be the absolute most devastating for our country?
I mean, it's kind of hard to tell who would be the worst. You know, I know, in my opinion, who has the analysis and the will to fight to get us out of this death spiral that we're in, and that's Bernie Sanders. As far as the rest of them are concerned, you know, I'll pick a winner. I'm not going to pick a loser.
Yeah. And even though when you were on the show last month, you said, if you want to beat Trump, vote for Bernie. I kind of took that as an endorsement, but I'm going to capitalize on this, no pun intended, and I'm going to post on Twitter that guess what? Lee Carter just officially endorsed Bernie Sanders. So, you know.
By all means. So, I think I'm the first elected official in Virginia to do it. Certainly the first one in the General Assembly. I don't know, there might be some city councilman somewhere that's done it. But definitely the first one in the General Assembly to endorse Bernie for this election. We've had a couple of people endorse Buttigieg for some reason. But yeah.
My condolences. Yeah.
It's good to be the first. Hopefully I won't be the last. Hopefully I can convince more of my colleagues in the General Assembly that we need that kind of fight, that's the only way we're going to defeat Donald Trump, and we're going to stop the rise of the authoritarian right throughout the world, is by, declaring that we are on the side of working people full-throatedly, with no reservations, and fighting every single day for them.
Absolutely. I know we all think, Bernie is the one to beat Trump because, he is, but do you fear that if we get screwed again, that basically we went through Trump for no reason, because it would be more of the same. It would be back to brunch, everyone's, cognitive dissonance, everything. Do you feel like he's kind of like our only hope at this point to progress?
I really do. I think the most dangerous thing in the here and now, obviously, is Trump getting reelected. But long term, the danger that we face is if we don't restructure our economy to put people first, we're not addressing the conditions that gave rise to Trump in the first place. This goes back to my socialism. Socialism is inherently materialistic. People respond to the material conditions around them. They respond to the economic conditions around them, and they do that in predictable ways. And so Donald Trump was a predictable and predicted outcome of the economic and political environment that we've fostered in this country. And if we just hit the reset button, if we just go back to where we were on November 1st of 2016, we're going to get another Trump in a few years, and this time he won't be as incompetent.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think about the obsession with impeaching? Do you feel like it's just a distraction from things that are like really important?
I think we need to walk and chew gum at the same time. I think that getting rid of them as quickly as possible is extremely important. But you got to make sure you get Pence too. You can't one. You got to get rid of them both, because Pence is that Trump, but not as dumb, right? So in my view, he's every bit as dangerous as Donald Trump is, possibly even more so. But yeah, it can't be this all-consuming obsession that we see from a lot of leaders in the Democratic Party. It can't be the singular focus like it is to MSNBC contributors, right? We have to have political leadership that will pursue impeachment of both the president and vice president, but we also have to organize in our workplaces. We have to talk to our neighbors. We have to build structures of mutual aid so that we can, protect our neighbors when ICE comes knocking, or when disaster strikes and people need fresh water and clean food to eat because the grocery store has been flooded and there's no food in town. We need all of these things. Electoral politics alone is not going to do it. It's important to not neglect it. It is very, very important for the levers of power that we gain access to as a movement when we have people in elected office, but it is not the be-all, end-all. We're not going to achieve socialism from the top down. We're not going to vote it into existence. The best we can do, what I'm trying to do, is remove the barriers to organizing, remove the barriers to building a socialist economy, and empower working people to build that new world within the existing structure so that we can transition in an orderly manner rather than waiting for the whole thing to collapse.
Absolutely. Your district is really interesting because you won in a place where the incumbent, there were Republicans for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about an upset. Like, you finally turned the place blue, but you're a socialist. So
I turned it
into who the hell to hate. Yeah. Like, I don't know who to hate. What do I do now?
Yeah. So districts in the Virginia House of Delegates, they're all apportioned to about 84,000 residents. There's about 8.5 million people in Virginia, 100 districts, it's evenly split up. But my district traditionally has been one of the lowest in terms of voter participation. We have an incredibly high population of foreign nationals who can't vote. We have an incredibly high population of disenfranchised felons who can't vote. We have an incredibly high population of children who can't vote. We have an incredibly high population of college-age folks who could vote here but choose to vote at their campus in another district instead. And so out of those 84,000 people, we've got about 42,000 that are actually registered to vote. And out of those 42,000, my predecessor, who was a member of Republican leadership, one of the most powerful men in the South, was winning consistently with between 7,500 and 9,500 votes. Out of 84,000 people, 7,500 votes, and he was cruising to re-election. It wasn't even close. And this is the case in a lot of places. You hear this received wisdom is that people are in the middle, so you have to be like King Solomon and cut the baby in half. You have to, if you're in a competitive area, you have to be halfway between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. But that's not true. There are an extraordinarily small number of people who are undecided between the two major parties because they're in the middle of them. There is an overwhelming number of people who are undecided between the two political parties because they can't figure out who's worse. And if you look at the 2016 presidential election, if none of the above was a presidential candidate, he would have won 43 states, right? Yep. None of the above got 35, 40, 50% of the vote in every single state. And in 43 states, it was more than the number of people that voted for either Trump or Clinton. And so you need to find a way to reach those folks. You need to find a way to let them know they have an opportunity to vote for a better future. And you need to walk the walk so that they know that you're not going to sell them out when you get into office. And that was the key to it. I went out there, I said, I'm not promising you that we're going to win on all of these issues. We're certainly not going to win on all of them all at once. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to wake up every morning and I'm going to fight. And I'm going to fight to reduce your rent because I'm not taking money from your landlord. I'm going to fight to reduce your power bill because I'm not taking money from Dominion Power. I'm going to fight to reduce your insurance premiums or eliminate them, preferably long-term solution, because I'm not taking money from Anthem and Aetna and Humana, right? I'm going to fight on the issues that really impact your day-to-day life because I'm not taking a dime from the people who are profiting off of your suffering, and I never will. That's the key. That right there. You need to convince those people who don't vote that it's worth the 20 minutes of their time. And that's the hardest damn thing to do. But it's also the most productive. Once you commit to that path, people respond. I mean, I had people, in the days and weeks leading up to the 2017 election, I had people who, I was going through the precincts in my district with traditionally the lowest participation rates. I had people that were coming up to me saying, "Hey, you're that guy I saw on TV," which they didn't see me on TV. They saw my digital ads while they were, playing Words with Friends or whatever. But they were coming up to me. I saw you on TV. You're my guy, man. the last time I voted was for Obama in 2008 because I didn't think anyone cared ever since then. But I think you do, so I'm going to go out and vote for you. And you're coming up and taking selfies with me, and that's when you know you've hit the nerve, right? That's when you know that you're onto something. When people start reacting like that, when people are just happy to see you walk around in their neighborhood because they know that you're fighting, they don't want to be promised an immediate win. They want to be promised a fight, and they want you to live up to that promise.
Right on. What are the things you hear the most when you're canvassing or phone banking? What are people's biggest concerns?
I can't pay the bills. That's it. That's really what it boils down to. I can't pay the bills. And there are all kinds of facets of people's lives that are that happen as a consequence of that. You have people that are turning to opioids because they are depressed because they feel like they're never going to get out of debt, or they have chronic pain because of a workplace injury that was never properly treated because of the workers' compensation system. Or you have people who say, I'm working 90 hours a week and I never see my kids. Or you got people that are saying, man, the schools really need an improvement because we got kids in trailers because nobody wants to, because the rich folks across town don't want to pay enough property tax to properly fund our schools. It all comes down to just that basic, that desire to have a place where everyone can live and work free from worry about how they're going to put food on the table, how they're going to pay the rent, how they're going to see a doctor when they need to, how they're going to put their kids through school, and whether or not they're going to be discriminated against based on who they are, who they love, what they believe, or who they were born to be. That's what it comes down to. It just comes down to there is a problem with my life, and usually it's somehow connected to the economy, whether directly or indirectly. And I don't think anyone's fighting for me. Are you going to?
Yeah, right on. Let me see. Cheryl had a question. Do you feel that people are more perceptive to you this time around, seeing that you've been in the position for a while now? Do you think that they're more willing to listen?
Well, as far as the voters, they were certainly willing to listen in 2017, right? So, the previous record for a Democrat running in this district was, I believe, about 7,200 votes was the most that any Democrat had ever gotten. I won with 11,366. And so, clearly people were receptive to the message and they responded. That's people in the district. There definitely is a better reception among, folks that are in the know, folks that are within partner organizations, environmental groups like the Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, labor unions are 100% more receptive than they were in 2017. Groups like Planned Parenthood and NARAL that advocate for reproductive health care rights, they're more receptive. It's the folks that have been involved in the process that are more receptive, because the biggest challenge I had in 2017 was convincing people that I was worth taking a chance on. It was this idea that, he's some loony lefty that'll never win. There's this George McGovern that people are going to reject at the polls, but clearly that didn't happen. And so those folks that have been involved in advocacy, those folks who are in organizations that would be and should be allied with our movement, are more willing to take a chance because I've proven that I can win. And that's what we got to do. We got to do it everywhere. We have to take on these underdog fights. We have to win a bunch of them. And demonstrate that the conventional wisdom that you have to capitulate to the right to win is wrong. We have to show that strength, that we are the ones that can motivate voters. We are the ones that can get people out there. We are the ones that can bring change. Go ahead and hop on our train.
Yeah, right on. When you're out canvassing and everything, do people like call you a commie? Do they is it difficult for them to I mean, I saw the GOP flyer with your face. It had Marx and Stalin and this progression, and then boom, there's your face.
Yeah.
Which some people would take that as a compliment. I don't know, but yeah, and then they made their damn signs with duct tape and glitter glue. So I know they're not talking shit, because that was sad.
Yeah, that was a mailer that was sent out by my opponent in 2017 that had that famous drawing of sort of the Mount Rushmore of Marxism Leninism, right? It was Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, and Lee Jin Carter, and all the copy on it was talking about my healthcare policy, because if there's one thing people remember Stalin for, it's the health insurance. It was comical. It's this out of date red baiting from the 1980s that just doesn't work anymore, because when you call yourself a socialist, you got people who grew up in the Cold War that are just never going to react positively to you. But frankly, they thought Obama was a communist, so it doesn't really matter how hard you try to distance yourself from it. They're never gonna be swayed. And then you got folks my age and younger who, I mean, I was what, 2 or 3 when the Berlin Wall fell? I don't remember the Cold War at all. And so I'm able to look back dispassionately, from a historical lens at what happened in Russia and what happened in Yugoslavia and what happened in China and what happened in Cuba, without the propaganda that was permeating during the Cold War. And I'm able to say, okay, yeah, this bad thing is true, that bad thing is not. But we're able to draw lessons learned from that experiment in trying to build socialism. And the number one lesson that was learned for me was, if you put the responsibility on a small handful of people at the top to turn the economy over to working people, it's not likely to happen. It has happened in a couple of cases. The Cuban government right now is turning sectors of their economy over to worker cooperatives. The Yugoslav government did that, from the 1970s to the 1980s, where they were handing segments of the economy over to worker self-directed enterprise. But it didn't happen in the Soviet Union, right? And it's because, again, looking at incentive structures, the leadership didn't have an incentive to actually do it. They had an incentive to keep up the rhetoric. They didn't have an incentive to turn control of the economy over once they had it consolidated in their hands. And so this is why, my political project is not to sort of seize control of the economy and then dole it out. My political project is to remove barriers to organizing so that working people can create cooperatives from scratch, or we can, create a system where we have a legal framework that, businesses have to be converted to a worker cooperative structure directly, without having that transitional period of government ownership in between. This is the advantage of time and being able to learn the lessons of the past. And when they just throw that label out there, just laugh. Don't worry about what they're going to say. They're going to say it anyway. Like I said, they thought Obama was a communist. They thought Bill Clinton was a communist. The right has been putting out memes of the CNN logo labeled Communist News Network for decades. They're just going to say what they're going to say. You're never going to reach folks on the far right. Don't worry about it. point out that they're just being clowns and move on and talk about how we as working people are going to take command of our own destinies.
Absolutely. So, you know, I was scrolling through your Twitter feed, and people get mad about the stupidest shit. Like it was yesterday, I believe, you know, you posted something about, you know, somebody like got in trouble with the police because they accidentally sprayed them with water when they were parking, which is just so abhorrent in so many ways. And
it wasn't accidental. I mean, they did.
Well, to me, it was accidental.
Yeah, no. I mean, these cops were soaked from head to toe. But, you know, a little humiliation in a water fight on a 102-degree day certainly does not warrant incarceration, especially when it's the NYPD that we're talking about. This is the same agency that killed Eric Garner for selling loose cigarettes, right? So, you know, that's what I pointed out. And of course, you know, it has blown up. You know, that tweet is still going viral. Of, you know, several thousand folks retweeted by this point. And there's always people that just demand unquestioning obedience of authority. Mm-hmm. And those people get mad whenever you say, "Hey, wait a minute," you know, maybe,
and they're all white.
Maybe cops aren't always right, you know. But those people are just going to be mad. Let them be mad.
Yeah, because you shared this one and the dude was just like, "Fuck you," and I'm like, why? He's just sharing a post. Like, who cares? Like, you don't see a problem with this. But yeah, you had a really good thread about, you know, unarmed Black men being killed. Like, this is not stopping. It's not ending. And it's not a certain state or town or anything. And, you know, these cops, not only do they do these things and not get penalized for them, the most they do is get like laid off with pay or desk duty with pay. And it's so frustrating. Do you have things like that? Well, first of all, is your district, you know, what is the race, lack of a better term, ethnicities in your district?
Yeah. You know, my district is, you know, it's very racially diverse. We have, I believe, about 13% of our population is African American. About 23 or 24% of our population is either Hispanic or Latino or both. And so, you know, we do have to deal with these tensions. You know, I'm not aware at this point of any recent cases of police brutality in my district, although, you know, I'm sure they happen because they happen everywhere. But one of the things that has happened recently that's been in the news here in Virginia is about an hour and a half away in Harrisonburg. Harrisonburg's a little college town out in the mountains. It's home to James Madison University. It is an overwhelmingly white town. But there is still an African-American population there, and that African-American population is disproportionately on the receiving end of violent force from the police. And there was one particular instance, I believe it was towards the end of last year, where, you know, it's a college town. There's parties all the time. There's noise complaints all the time. And frankly, when it's a white party, that gets a noise complaint, the police come, they knock on the door, they say, turn the music down, and they leave 99% of the time. But this was a black party, putting it bluntly, and the police came and, you know, they said, turn the music down, and the music was turned down, and then the police got confrontational, and they escalated, and, you know, the hosts of the party refused to sign a piece of paper acknowledging that they had been served with a summons, which, you know, there are ways to deal with that aren't violent. You know, you just mail it, right? You know, you mail the certificate of service saying that the summons was delivered. But the cops decided not to do that. they decided to bust out the handcuffs, and a predictable reaction to a bullshit arrest is to try to get away. And so Melissa Duncan tried to get away, and it's a perfectly normal human reaction. You don't want to be on the receiving end of violent force. So she went back inside, and the cops beat down her door, invaded her home, and threw her to the ground and tased her over a noise complaint and a piece of paper that she wouldn't sign. There was absolutely no public safety goal that was served by that escalation. None whatsoever. And she's the one that went to jail. She's the one that's facing charges right now, not the cops that invaded her home and tased her over nothing. We have a real problem in this country because people have this idea that police authority is never to be questioned. The government authority is never to be questioned. But we see on a day-to-day basis that in the lives of marginalized communities, the number one source of violence is the police. We see it with people of color. We see it with trans folks. We see it with sex workers in particular, that they whenever you ask them, what's the most dangerous part of your job, it's not dealing with customers, it's dealing with the police, right? So one of my goals is to reduce the total violence in people's lives. And if the police are adding violence to people's lives rather than keeping them safe, then we need to stop those interactions with the police from occurring in the first place. And that's going to take a fundamental restructuring of how we deal with enforcing the law. It's going to take a fundamental restructuring of policing as an institution. It's going to take ending our system of mass incarceration. We incarcerate more people per capita than any other country that's ever existed. We have the highest incarceration rate in history, and it's not even close. Second place isn't even close.
Yeah.
We call ourselves the land of the free. But if you don't submit immediately to police authority, whether or not that police authority is being used correctly, you're executed summarily. If you don't, if you don't abide by the senseless prohibition on cannabis products, you're going to find yourself in jail, usually for black and brown folks, occasionally for white folks. But you're going to find yourself incarcerated because you wanted to relax and get high and watch SpongeBob, right? You weren't hurting anybody, but the police are going to come and kick down your door and take you away and separate you from your family and destroy any prospect of providing a decent living for them that you might have had. We have an absurd system that doesn't keep people safe. It adds to the violence in people's lives, and it needs to be dismantled.
Right on. Is there a video of this woman, Melissa, being attacked?
There is.
Oh,
there is. Yeah. It's a police body cam footage, and the Harrisonburg police tried to say, she didn't immediately comply with being arrested. Well, guess what? They didn't have a valid reason, in my view, to arrest her in the first place. Of course she didn't comply.
Right.
Of course. I wouldn't have.
Yeah, exactly.
But I probably wouldn't have been tased because look at me.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Oh my God, that's so scary. I can't even fathom. The thing that's so horrible is, especially with sex workers, they are scared to call the cops for help. Why would they?
Oh, yeah.
They get raped, beaten, bullied by them all the time. Why? So I take it you support, I don't want to say legalization of sex work, but the decriminalization of sex work.
Yeah, so those are two entirely different policies. The word decriminalize and the word legalize get conflated a lot, especially in our discussion around drugs. But when it pertains to sex work, both of those policies have been implemented in the real world, right? Legalization has been implemented in Nevada, where you have a regulatory structure, and decriminalization, full decriminalization, has been implemented in New Zealand. And full decriminalization just removes references to sex work from the criminal code entirely, right? And the reason I think that decriminalization is better, and I do support full decriminalization on the New Zealand model, with a couple of things done differently. Primarily, it's in New Zealand, it's still criminalized for non-citizens, and we need to not do that. It is because when you have that regulatory framework like you see in Nevada, or you see in countries like Sweden or Norway or what have you, there are still criminal penalties to not complying, and there are upfront costs to compliance. And so what you end up with is you end up with a system where you have folks who and I don't speak of this as exclusively women as sex workers, folks, because there are men who do sex work, there are non-binary folks who do sex work, there are actually a lot of non-binary folks who do sex work to pay the bills. So you have folks who want to do sex work, but they can't afford to go through the regulatory hoops, and so they end up being beholden to someone who can upfront that money. And we have a word for that person. It's a pimp.
Pimp.
Right? Whereas decriminalization, they can pursue that line of work in whatever way they feel safest and most comfortable. And if there's a problem with a client, if there is a pimp or anything, if they come across any situation where they feel unsafe, then they're able to call for help without fear of repercussions. Whereas in a legalization structure, you have two tiers of sex workers. You have the ones who can afford to do it above board, and you have the ones that are still criminalized because they're poor.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
And sort of a little homework for any viewers out there that want to learn more about
Go
this.
to a sex worker.
Well, there's a video that I'll recommend. There's a YouTube channel, Philosophy Tube, run by a British guy named Ollie Thorne, and he did a wonderful piece on sex work that puts it in a really digestible manner. And his videos are actually not only informative, they're also entertaining. So I would recommend that folks watch that if they want to learn more about the problems inherent in criminalization and the difference between full legalization, Nordic model legalization, and decriminalization.
And what's his name once more?
Philosophy Tube.
Philosophy Tube. Okay, cool. What is so this is I didn't realize how long we were going here. I'm sorry. I'm keeping you exhausted. What is something you want to leave our viewers with so that they recommend you to other socialists, progressives, burners, and especially those in Virginia?
Yeah, the number one thing that I want to leave people with is the idea that a better world is possible, but it's not going to happen by accident, right? There's this common phrase, good things come to those who wait. Fuck that. Good things come to those who fight. And we've got to fight every single day. And by fighting, by analyzing the way the world currently is and fighting for a better one, we can create a future from scratch where people don't have to worry about hunger, where people don't have to worry about homelessness, where people don't have to worry about being trapped forever in debt, where people don't have to worry about police brutality, where we don't have to worry about people being ground up by the endless war machine that we've built in this country. We don't have to worry about all those things. We can just live and work and enjoy our lives, because that's what everybody wants. right? We want a fulfilling life where we can do productive labor, and we can have our social lives and our family lives. We can raise our kids if we want. We can feel safe, and we can not be exploited. And we can be the ones in charge of our own destiny, right? That's the number one thing that we're fighting for. We're fighting to make sure that we are in charge of our own destiny, not the billionaires and not the transnational corporations. And,
Absolutely.
And my ask for your viewers is follow me on Twitter. That's twitter.com/Carter4VA. It's all spelled out. It looks like Carter Forva when you spell it out. So Carter for VA is my Twitter handle. Follow me on Twitter. Retweet if you like what you see. There is a fundraising link at the top. It's also at the top of CarterForVirginia.com. If you're able to, whether it's $1, $10, $100, whatever you can. I don't take a single dime from for-profit corporations or industry interest groups. I never have, I never will, but that means that I am dependent upon that grassroots support. So please, 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 please think of it like Patreon for politics, and please set up a monthly recurring contribution of whatever you can spare.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for finally coming on.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. You guys, thank you as always for tuning in. I apologize that Rokana had to cancel last moment because of getting called to the floor. I know he's not lying. I've already had him 3 times, so it's all good. We're rescheduling. I'm already talking with him. So I did set something up. We're working out the date. It's going to be a weekend. But I am interviewing, I'm going to do a debate with the 3 Democrats running against Nancy Pelosi. One of them, Shahid, who I get asked to have on all the time. So he's coming on, and he's coming on with the 2 other people running against Pelosi as well. So we'll just do a debate.
It's the man bun. It's the source of his power.
Yeah. And he's into music, so I mean that's a plus, and he endorsed Bernie, so I mean I'm trying not to be biased though. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching, and I have some other great candidates coming up as well. So thank you so much again, Lee. Best of luck with everything. I will definitely encourage those Virginians to vote for you for sure.
Thank you so much for having me on, and folks, join a damn union.
Hells yes. And vote for Bernie. That too. Take care, Lee. Thank you again.
Bye-bye.